Pokémon has a lot of happy, exciting and inspirational moments, but it's also not the perfect world you'd expect considering all the cute monsters it has to offer. In fact, there are some events in the anime and video games that have an important value when it comes to how we perceive life. In this Iceberg, we'll explore the most shocking and emotional moments in the Pokémon anime and video games. Welcome to the Emotional Pokémon Moments Iceberg.
Say my name, Eisenberg. Goddamn right.
Red never comes home. This is more like a thought I talked about in my Pallet Town video and not really something that is confirmed in the games, but when you play Pokemon Gold, Silver and Crystal and go to Pallet Town 3 years after the events of Pokemon Red and Blue, you see Red's mom sitting in the kitchen alone, wondering if Red's okay after his legendary journey to become the champion. It's true that we fight Red at the summit of Mount Silver, but the fact that Red is alive doesn't mean that he's returned home. We see evidence of this because when we check his PC, it says that it hasn't been used in a long time. If you think about it, Red's personality resembles that of Goku in Dragon Ball, as he's a character that is willing to forsake his family to pursue his dream of becoming the strongest ever. Red's mom mentions that her son hasn't even called, something that would be a big concern for almost any parent. Tectonics. This is not the first time we see the grave of a Pokemon, as in Pokemon Red, Blue and Yellow, the Pokemon Tower houses hundreds of them. However, an interesting place lies on 5 Island in the Kanto region, as the memorial pillar serves as a grave for a trainer Sonics called Tectonics. If you place a lemonade on the pillar, its trainer will give the player TM42 facade as a thank you. Charizard's frustration. Charizard is without a doubt one of Ash's strongest Pokemon. Nonetheless, in the episode Charizard's Burning Ambitions, we realize that Ash's Fire Starter isn't even close to being the strongest Pokemon if we compare it to the Charizard in the Charizard Valley. Ash's Pokemon gets humiliated in front of every single Charizard in the place, completely shattering its ego. After losing against the gentlest Charizard, Lisa denies Ash's Charizard access to the place. However, out of pity, she opens the gates so that it can battle her female Charizard, an opponent it doesn't stand a chance against. Charizard ends up in the water, frustrated because of how weak it is, but in spite of everything, it remains there until the next day. That's when Ash decides to leave Charizard, and the way in which he painfully says goodbye to one of his best friends made a deeply emotional episode even harder to digest. Pikachu turns into stone. Same as Ash did in the first movie, in Diancie and the Cocoon of Destruction, Pikachu is struck by one of Yveltal's attacks, resulting in the electric Pokemon slowly turning into stone. This sad moment that reminds us of the first movie didn't last long though, as with the help of Xerneas, Pikachu goes back to normal. Anistar City Old Man. There's an old man in Anistar City in the Kalos region whose wife passed away. Due to his loneliness, he asks the player to lend him one of his Pokemon to keep him company. However, after the player beats the Elite Four, he can go back to the old man's house only to find that he passed away. The old man leaves a letter attached to your Pokemon stating that the Pokemon made him happy until the very end. He apologized for not being able to take care of it anymore, and he leaves a comment shard for the player as a token for his gratitude. Brock and Misty's goodbye. Having to part ways after forging a deep connection with friends can be one of the hardest experiences in life, especially if you're not sure if you'll see them again. This is how it felt when we watched Ash, Misty and Brock taking different paths, as they were the characters we were used to see for almost 300 episodes in the anime. Even though Misty didn't appear in as many episodes in the future as Brock, we got the opportunity to see her return several times. Despite saying goodbye in the 5th season of the Pokemon anime, she's the female friend with the most appearances in the history of the anime, with a total of 296 episodes. The Ghost of Maiden's Peak. This story is told in the episode of the same name. It recounts the tale of a brave soldier who, 2000 years before the events of the anime, promised a young maiden he would return to her. He was sent off to war, but never came back. According to legend, the maiden waited so long for his return that she eventually turned to stone, a statue that visitors can still admire to this day. Despite all the time that has passed, the maiden has yet to reunite with her beloved in the afterlife. How many more thousands of years she will wait remains a mystery. Infernape defeats Electivire. One of the most cold-hearted trainers in the anime has to be Paul. Although he pushed Ash to the limit and is considered one of his best rivals, the fact he left Chimchar for not fulfilling his expectations outraged many. In a similar fashion to Charmander, Ash welcomed Chimchar to his team and became one of his strongest Pokémon, a Pokémon that would face Paul and his Electivire at the Sinnoh Pokémon League. When it looked like Infernape had lost the battle against Electivire, it opened its eyes just to see Paul's Pokémon mocking it and being called pathetic by the trainer who disowned it. Paul and Infernape's past made this battle even more satisfying because the fire Pokémon could finally demonstrate its previous trainer the immense power it gained from a trainer whose methods are the opposite of what he truly believed in. Infernape's reaction reminds me of the time when Goku goes Super Saiyan against Frieza, and considering that this Pokémon was inspired by Sun Wukong, it might not be a stretch to think that they took inspiration from Dragon Ball. Definitely a satisfying victory for Ash and company. Bye Bye Butterfree. This is a classic moment, and it holds a lot of significance because Butterfree was the first Pokémon Ash ever caught and fully evolved. In the episode Battle Aboard the Saint N, Ash is convinced to trade his Butterfree for Eradicate, a decision he would soon regret due to the strong bond he had formed with his first Pokémon. However, the real farewell comes in the episode Bye Bye Butterfree after Butterfree finds a mate. Knowing his Pokémon had to go, Ash had no choice but to say goodbye. Although Ash would later part ways with many of his Pokémon, the fact that Caterpie was his very first makes this moment especially emotional. Ash dies in the first movie. It's debatable if Ash actually dies as a result of the clash between Mew and Mewtwo's attacks, but this scene is what makes Mewtwo and Mew stop fighting. Pikachu tries to revive Ash with electric attacks, but its attempts are in vain. Only the tears of both the original Pokémon and their clones are able to bring Ash back to life, or at least back to normal, ending the clash between Mewtwo and Mew. I can't imagine how many children cried to this scene in the 90s. Charizard vs Blastoise. At the beginning of the anime, Gary was this confident and naturally skilled trainer that was always a mile ahead of Ash. Who doesn't remember Gary showing off the 10 badges he earned in the Kanto region? For almost 300 episodes, Ash had never won a single battle against Gary until their match at the Silver Conference, where Gary's starter faced Ash's Charizard, a reference to Red's Charizard and Blue's Blastoise. In spite of the disadvantage, Charizard was able to defeat Blastoise with a Seismic Toss attack. Cubone's mom. This is kind of a normal thing in Pokemon nowadays because many of us have been playing the games for years, but I was shocked the first time I read that Cubone was wearing its mother's skull, and all that tragic story about how he became an orphan due to Team Rocket's actions. In Pokemon Red, Blue and Yellow, we visit the Pokemon Tower in Lavender Town, and with the aid of the Sylph Scope, we reveal the ghost's identity to be that of Marowak, Cubone's mother. However, the real emotional moment can be seen in Pokemon Origins and Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, where we can see Marowak departing to the afterlife in front of the orphan Cubone. The idea of a Pokemon orphan is a really sad one. Jessie and James save their Pokemon. There are many farewells in the Pokemon anime, and Team Rocket's Pokemon have also parted ways. Jessie and James came across a cage full of Ekans and Koffing captured by a poacher. Since Arbok and Weezing feel empathy toward their unevolved forms, Team Rocket sets the Pokemon free, but they are stopped by a poacher whose Pupitar evolves into a Tyranitar. Arbok and Weezing are asked to leave the area to take care of the rest of the Pokemon, while Jessie, James and Meowth stay and fight the Tyranitar, saving their Pokemon from its Hyper Beam. That is the last time we see this poison-type Pokemon, as they live in tears of sadness and frustration from not being able to help their trainers. frozen Luxray. In the movie Pokémon I Choose You, after Ash experiences a nightmare I'll talk about later, Sorrel tells Ash how he lost a Luxray he was close to and that belonged to his family. When they got lost in a forest during a blizzard, Luxray protected the young boy from the extreme cold, but in turn, Luxray froze to death as a result. This loss made him distance himself from Pokémon until he caught a Lucario. AZ's Floette. It's incredible to think that love and the rage sparked by losing it could cause such a devastation that it ended a war between two regions. This is the story of AZ and his Floette, a Pokémon that tragically died during that very war. Heartbroken after receiving the body of his beloved companion, AZ built a machine to bring Floette back to life, but even that wasn't enough because he repurposed the machine into the ultimate weapon, unleashing destruction upon both warring nations. When Floette discovered what its trainer had done, she abandoned him. Cursed with immortality or at least a very long lifespan due to the machine's power, AZ wandered the earth for thousands of years searching for the Pokémon he had lost. Though Floette eventually returns, the loneliness of living an eternal life without it must have felt like an endless punishment. Pikachu vs. Leon's Charizard. For decades, Pokémon fans complained about the fact that Ash was unable to win a major Pokémon tournament, and we had a rough start when Ash lost against Richie because Charizard didn't want to obey. After that, he ended up in 8th place in several tournaments until the most controversial competition took place, and everybody was expecting Ash to become the champion against a Lance Mega Charizard X. Nonetheless, some people stopped watching the anime after that, and even though Ash did become the champion of the Alola Pokémon League, it didn't feel like the victory fans wanted to see, as this competition didn't really have the same prestige as some others. But that would change in the World Coronation series, where Ash takes part in a tournament that not only determines the strongest trainer of a given region, but of the entire world. A lot of people thought that Ash would lose, considering how Pikachu faints for a moment. While being unconscious, Pikachu then has a vision of every Pokémon Ash caught in every single region rooting for him, giving him enough power to attack Charizard. This was the moment that many Pokémon fans were waiting for, a deserved conclusion for Ash's long journey to become a Pokémon master. Dr. Fuji's tragic life. Dr. Fuji perished at the hands of Mewtwo in the anime. This is how the first Pokémon movie begins. Where I live, we didn't get to see the uncut story of Mewtwo's origin, but when I finally watched it, I realized Dr. Fuji's life was far more tragic than I had imagined. His past as a scientist remains unclear, but everything changed when his daughter Amber died in an accident. Using his scientific knowledge, he attempted to preserve Amber's soul and clone her, but this wouldn't have been possible without the help of Giovanni, who provided the necessary resources in exchange for the creation of the most powerful Pokémon in the world. Fuji's wife couldn't bear watching her husband become obsessed with bringing Amber back, so she chose to leave him. Although things seemed promising at first for Amber and the cloned Kanto starters, they ultimately couldn't survive the process, leaving Mewtwo as the only survivor. Amber's tragic death wasn't an isolated loss, it shattered her entire family. That's why her story remains one of the most heartbreaking and shocking events in Pokémon history. Red and Blue Rescue Team ending. One day, you wake up as a Pokémon, not knowing how exactly that happened. However, you can now talk to Pokémon, understand what they want, establish a deep connection with them, and set out on an adventure with your best friend to save the world. But suddenly, after everything you've gone through, it's time to depart. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Red Rescue Team and Blue Rescue Team have a deeply emotional ending where you have to make a choice. Go back to your world, where you were once a human, or stay with your best Pokémon friend. Although the protagonist is willing to go back to the human world, there's something holding them back. One of the most heartbreaking moments is seeing your friend crying over your absence, unable to accept the idea of never seeing you again. As I mentioned in my Mystery Dungeon RRT and BRT Iceberg, although the protagonist chooses to never return to the human world where their parents and friends will never hear from them again, it would have been devastating to leave their friend behind. The Pokémon Friends in Sun and Moon. If you remember My Sun and Moon Iceberg, you might be familiar with that story where a Slowpoke, a Pyukumuku and a Pikachu set out on their island challenge, and the text says that maybe you will spot them on your journey. In Ultra Sun and Moon, you can actually spot Pikachu, Pyukumuku and Slowpoke in Pikachu Valley, but there's a small issue. We can also see this Pokemon trio frozen by Lusamine, who states that they will be preserved for eternity. The question is, which story is canon? Because Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon are retellings of Sun and Moon, and I would like to think that the Pokemon trio is safe and happy in Pikachu Valley. Latios' death. If you've ever wondered what the Soul Dew is, it's the spirit of a Latios who sacrificed his life to protect the city of Altomare. In Pokemon Heroes, the Soul Dew lies hidden in the secret garden and plays a key role in keeping the city safe. At the end of the movie, the Soul Dew is stolen and becomes corrupted, triggering a massive wave that threatens to destroy Altomare. Latios and Latias join forces to stop the catastrophe, but tragically, Latios loses his life in the process. In addition to Latias losing her father, she also loses her brother. The spirit of Latios then becomes a new Soul Dew, continuing to protect the city from future threats. Phanpy and Cleffa. In the episode Wish Upon a Star Shape, a Cleffa falls from the sky and lands on Ash's Phanpy, saving it just before its UFO crashes on Earth. Soon after, a pair of UFO enthusiasts and Team Rocket attempt to capture Cleffa, but Phanpy protects it, forming a deep bond between the two Pokemon. Later, the Clefairy repair their spacecraft, using parts stolen from the evil teams and prepare for takeoff. However, Cleffa is hesitant to leave, torn by its connection to Phanpy. As the UFO begins to ascend, Cleffa runs after it, but is unable to reach it. In a touching moment, it evolves into Clefairy and gains the ability to fly, allowing it to reunite with its kind in the sky. Before leaving, the fairy Pokemon looks back with a sorrowful expression, saying goodbye to the Phanpy who once saved its life. One thing is to say goodbye to someone you know, another to say goodbye when you're unsure if you'll ever see them again, but when you have to say goodbye to a friend or someone you love, knowing it will be the last time, that hits differently. Espurr and the Pendant. This story is similar to one we'll see deeper in the Iceberg, although not as extreme in terms of time. Ash and his friends take shelter from heavy rain and end up in an old mansion, where they come across an Espurr. Over time, Espurr reveals that it's been searching for the owner of the mansion, an old lady who once gave it a beautiful pendant. Espurr had to come back to return the piece of jewelry, but the woman was nowhere to be found. By the end of the episode, the old woman's granddaughter appears, and when asked about her grandmother, she explains that she passed away, leaving the psychic Pokemon heartbroken. The granddaughter then takes Espurr to the cemetery where her grandmother rests, so it can tell her about the pendant and say goodbye. Even though Pokemon is mainly aimed at children, I think it's important they touch on deep topics like this. Stoutland and Litten. In the episode One Journey Ends, Another Begins, we see the story of a stray Litten who is friends with an old Stoutland. This is one of those episodes that you don't really expect. Generally, when a trainer takes a Pokemon to a Pokemon Center, it's basically guaranteed that the Pokemon will be alright and ready to battle some more. However, when Ash takes Stoutland to a Pokemon Center, Nurse Joy doesn't have good news. Instead of staying at the place, Stoutland goes back to the street and Litten joins it, unaware that that's the last time he will be with its best friend. When Litten wakes up, Stoutland is no more, and both Ash and Professor Kukui know it. The concept of death is hard to understand and accept, but with time and support from those who love you, life can be less difficult. Ninetales and Brock. During their journey through the Johto region, Ash and company encounter a girl named Lococo and a Ninetales on a foggy night. She offers shelter and food to the young trainers, but what stands out is how unusually friendly Ninetales is toward Brock. Not long after, Lococo tries to convince Brock to stay with her and Ninetales, explaining they've been living alone in the mansion for a long time. However, Ash and Misty soon realize that the girl isn't real. After being kicked out of the mansion, Ash and Misty discover a portrait of a man who bears bears a striking resemblance to Brock. They also find an old Pokeball similar in design to those from the Hisui era and a diary written by the mansion's former owner dated 200 years before Ash's journey. After revealing that she's only an illusion created by Ninetales, Lococo reveals the truth. 2 centuries earlier, Ninetales' master left the mansion promising to return in a month's time, but months turned into years and the man never came back. One by one, the servants abandoned the mansion. The place began to crumble, but Ninetales refused to leave. After 100 years, Ninetales understood that its master could no longer be alive. Heartbroken, it finally decided to leave, but a strange force kept it bound to the mansion, and so 200 years passed. As Ninetales and Lococo recount this tragic story, Team Rocket intervenes, but in the chaos, Ninetales' ancient Pokeball is shattered, finally releasing it from the force that had kept it trapped for centuries. I remember watching this episode and wishing Ninetales could join Brock's team, even though he already had a Vulpix at the time. In the end, Ninetales was finally free, but that doesn't change the fact that the idea of a person or Pokemon waiting endlessly for someone who's never coming back is absolutely heartbreaking. Harriet Snubbull. Throughout the anime and video games, we've heard or seen some Pokemon passing away, but I don't think there's any scene in the history of the franchise that compares to the way Harriet Snubbull died. During a fire that occurred 50 years prior to the present of the movie, a Snubbull belonging to a young Harriet sacrificed itself to retrieve a key to operate a console in the old power plant. Although Snubbull tried to escape, it was caught in the explosion. By the end of the movie, we can see Harriet having a flashback of this moment and how regretful she was for not being able to save her Pokemon. However, we can see the spirit of her Snubbull hugging her before vanishing, reminding her that her loyal Snubbull never stopped loving her even after death. This is without a doubt one of the saddest moments in the history of the Pokemon universe. The Pokemon world doesn't exist. Have you ever had a nightmare so terrible that when you wake up, you feel like the luckiest person on earth? After losing a battle with his Charmeleon against an Incineroar, Ash gets upset due to his defeat and the fact he was told that he was the worst trainer his opponent had ever battled. He walks toward the forest where Pikachu follows him, and Ash says he wished he had chosen Bulbasaur or Squirtle. After that, Marshadow puts Ash in a sleep-like state, causing him to dream about a world where Pokemon don't exist. Ash feels that something is off, but he can tell exactly why. He starts wondering about what lies beyond the limits of the city, thinking it would be incredible to venture into faraway lands with his best friend, a friend that doesn't exist in that world. Thankfully, Ash wakes up and realizes that everything was a nightmare. I guess this is similar to dreaming about something bad happening to our loved ones, just to wake up, look around and realize that life is way better than we think. Memories in the Mist. If there's an episode of the Pokemon anime that is overloaded with emotional moments, that is Memories in the Mist. Tapu Fini is able to create a mist that is capable of reuniting people and Pokemon with those who have passed away. Litten, now a Torracat, is able to see Stoutland and shows it how strong he has become. Hapu is also able to see her grandfather, but nothing compares to Mallow's encounter with her mother. At the beginning of the episode, she tells Lana that she has a lot of regrets because she told her mom that she hated her for always apologizing for being at the hospital. That was the very last thing that Mallow said to her mother before she passed away. This has to be one of the most painful regrets anyone can experience, and getting a second chance to tell a person who is no longer alive what we truly feel is an opportunity that can never arrive. However, thanks to Tapu Fini's powers, she is able to reunite with her mom. Mallow apologizes for saying that she hated her, and her mom thanks Mallow for bringing so much love to her and her family. In addition, Mallow thanks her for being a wonderful and loving mother. This is without a doubt the most emotional moment in Pokemon history. Instead of asking you to leave a comment, please go hug your mom, dad, a family member, or any person that is special to you and tell them that you love them. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to check out the Eisenberg Experience channel for more video game icebergs, and remember that you can become a member of the channel as well, with great benefits as how to become a YouTuber. Shout out to Aiming to Misbehave, Derry, and Edgardo Otrera for joining the members of the channel, and a big thanks to all the members. See you in the next one.